Hey up guys, we're back. It's been a little while, maybe about a week since I last played this. Well, someone to tell, I don't know what it is. Myron C. Fagan about the Illuminati. It's worth listening to actually. I'll put it on and play the game, but you guys can listen to it if you want.
Salem in Germany, and Anabreiter in Greece. These three are known ones. There are others that are kept undercover. King Philip, the husband of Britain's Queen Elizabeth, was executed at Georgetown at the instigation of Lord Louis Mountbatten, his uncle, a Rothschild relative, who became Britain's admiral.
Think you're all clear?
After World War II ended. Number 3, all influential people trapped in becoming under the control of the Illuminati, plus the cruelty of the specially educated and trained, were to be used as agents and placed behind the scenes of all governments as experts and specialists, so they would advise the top executives to adopt policies which would, in the long run, serve the secret plans of the Illuminati one-world conspiracy and bring about the destruction of the government and religions they were elected or appointed to serve. Do you know how many such men operate in our government at this very time?
We've done quite a few now.
Rush, Max America, Hubert Humphrey, Fulbright, Peter, and go on and on and on. Number 4.
Get the fuck out!
The directive of White House plan was to obtain absolute control of the press. At that time, the only mass communication used to distribute information to the public, so that all news and information would be slandered, so that the masses could be convinced that a one-world government only solution was very possible. Now do you know who owns and controls our mass communications media? I think practically all lost in power.
It's a bit jumpy this, what's going on here?
All the national radio and TV channels in the nation are owned and controlled.
Auto drive now enabled.
The same is true of every chain of metropolitan newspapers and magazines, also of the press wire service, such as Associated Press, United Press International, etc. The supposed gifts of all those media are merely the front of the internationalist language.
One thing I hate about the Philippines guys is barking dogs.
Auto drive now disabled.
What he really meant was, our CFR had the power to lie and be believed by the brainwashed Americans. Let's again go back to the first day.
Auto drive now enabled.
Because Britain and France were the two greatest world powers in the late years of the 18th century, White House ordered the Illuminati to fund the colonial wars, including our Revolutionary War, to weaken the British Empire and organize the French Revolution to destroy the French Empire.
Auto drive now disabled.
Revolution to start in 1789. However, in 1784, a true act of God placed the Bavarian government.
I think it's an Doberman. I saw it today. The dog was barking.
Let's clean up this fucking mess.
Here is how that act of God happened. It was in 1874 that White House issued its orders for the French Revolution. The German rifle put it into book form.
Suspects reported in your area, potentially armed and hostile. I'm in pursuit of the target.
A copy of this book was sent to the
Control,
Illuminati.
individual is armed.
headed by Robespierre, the White House had delegated to foment the French Revolution. The courier was struck and killed by lightning as he rode through Wallerstein on his way from Frankfurt to Paris. The police found the subversive documents on his body and turned them over to the proper authorities. After careful study of the plot, the Bavarian government ordered the police to raise White House
Control, I can't see the suspect. Please advise.
homes of his most influential associates.
Why is he jumping?
Pursuing the target. Over. Control, we are unsighted of suspect. Over.
Oops. What the fuck?
Control, add suspect to the most wanted list. Over.
In 1785, the Bavarian government outlawed the Illuminati and closed the lobby in the Grand Orient.
Auto drive now enabled.
In 1786, they published all the details of the conspiracy.
Auto drive now disabled.
The original writings of the Order and Sense of the Illuminati. Copies of the entire conspiracy were sent to all the heads of church in Europe. But the power of the Illuminati, which was actually the power of the Rothschilds, was so great that this warning was ignored. Nevertheless, the Illuminati became a deadly word, and it went underground. At the same time, White House ordered the Illuminati to infiltrate into the lodges of Freemasonry and form their own secret society within all secret societies.
Brainless tin bucket.
Only Masons who proved themselves international.
I think you know
Those
exactly
whose conduct proved they had defected from God were initiated into the Illuminati. Henceforth, the conspirators downed the both the philosophy and humanitarianism to conceal their revolutionary and subversive activity. In order to infiltrate into Masonic lodges in Britain, White House invited John Robeson over to Europe. Robeson was a high-degree Mason of the Scottish Rite. He was a professor of natural philosophy at
Oh, here we go.
and secretary of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. Robeson did not fall for the lie that the objective of the Illuminati was to create a benevolent dictatorship. The detective reacted to himself so well that he was entrusted with a copy of White House revised conspiracy for study and safety. Anyway, because the heads of state and church in France were deluded into ignoring the warnings given them, the revolution broke out in 1789 as scheduled by White House.
What the fuck?
In order to alert other governments to their danger, in 1798 Robeson published a book entitled Proof of a Conspiracy to Destroy All Governments and Religions. But his warnings were ignored, exactly as our American people have been ignoring all warnings about the United Nations and the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR. Now here is something that was done.
Seriously?
Outrage many who hear this. But there is documentary proof that our own Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton became students of White House. Jefferson was one of White House's strongest defenders when he was outlawed by his government. And it was Jefferson who infiltrated the Illuminati into the then newly organized lodges of the Scottish Rite in New England. Here is the proof. In 1789, John Robeson warned all Masonic leaders in America that the Illuminati had infiltrated into their lodges. On July 19, 1789, David Tappan, president of Harvard University, issued the same warning to the graduating class and lectured them on the influence Illuminism was acquiring on American politics and religion. And to top it off, John Quincy Adams, who had organized the New England Masonic lodges, issued his warning. He wrote 3 letters to Colonel William L. Stone, a top Mason, in which he exposed how Jefferson was using
I'll just call that.
the luministic purposes. Those 3 letters are at this very time in Wittenberg Square Library in Philadelphia. In short, Jefferson, founder of the Democratic Party, was a member of the Illuminati, which at least partly accounts for the condition of the party at this time, and through infiltration of the Republican Party, we have attracted nothing of Royal America today.
Urgent call. Possible hostile at your location.
At the time of this unit,
Control, we are pursuing the suspect. Over.
not by any means destroy the Illuminati spirit. It merely
Drones are on their way to the suspect.
Realizing that the one-world idea was, for the moment, still, the Rothschilds decided that the future proper lives would have to do it by heightening their control of the money systems of the
Weapon has been drawn. Moving in.
earlier, by a ruse, the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo had been falsified. Rothschild had spread a story that Napoleon had won back battle. That had precipitated a terrific panic on the stock market in England.
We are in pursuit. I say again, in pursuit.
And Nathan Rothschild bought all the stocks for virtually a penny on its dollar value. That gave him complete control of the economy of Britain and virtually of all Europe. So immediately after
Control, we have an officer down.
piano at Boomerang, Rothschild forced Britain to set up a new Bank of England, which he absolutely controlled. Exactly as later, through Jacob Smith, he engineered our own Federal Reserve Act, which gave the House of Rothschild a secret control of the economy of the United States. But now for a moment, let's dwell on the activities of the Illuminati in the United States. In 1826, one Captain William Morgan decided it was his duty to inform all Masons and the general public what the full truth was regarding the Illuminati, their secret plans and concerted objectives. Also reveal the identity of the masterminds of the conspiracy. The Illuminati promptly tried Morgan in absentia and convicted him of treason. They ordered one Richard Howard, an English Illuminati, to carry out their sentence of execution of the traitor.
Control, we're pursuing the suspect.
Morgan was warned and tried to escape to Canada. But Howard caught up with him near the border, near the Niagara Gorge, to be exact, where he murdered him. This was verified in the sworn statements made in New York by one Avery Allen to the effect that he heard Howard render his report of the execution to a meeting of Vice Deputies in St. John Hall, New York. He also told how arrangements had been made to ship Howard back to England. That Allen affidavit was on record in New York City archives. Very few Masons and very few of the general public know that general disapproval over that incident of murder caused approximately half of all the Masons in the northern jurisdiction of the United States to secede. Copies of the minutes of the meeting held to discuss that matter are still in existence in safe hands, and that all that secrecy emphasizes the power of the masterminds of the Illuminati.
Not doing well there, am I? Whoops.
In early 1850, the Illuminati held a secret meeting in New York, which was addressed by a British Illuminati.
Control, we are pursuing the target.
Those in attendance,
Patrol, we are self-control.
the Illuminati was organized to unite the nihilist and atheist groups with all other subversive groups into an international, which is known as communism. That was when the word communist first came into use, and it was intended to be the supreme weapon and scare word to terrify the whole world and drive the terrorized people into the Illuminati one world.
Negative. No sign of suspect.
This scheme,
Over.
communism, was to be used to enable the Illuminati to foment future wars and revolutions. Clinton Roosevelt, a direct ancestor of
Control.
Franklin Roosevelt,
Let's put out an APW.
Forrest
We're
Greeley
getting
and
nowhere
Charles
here.
Dana, foremost newspaper publishers of that time, were appointed to head a committee to raise funds for the new venture. Of course, most of the funds were provided by the Rothschilds. And this fund was used to finance Karl Marx and Engels when they wrote about capital and the Communist Manifesto in Soho, England. And this clearly reveals that communism is not a so-called ideology, but a secret weapon, a bogeyman word to serve the purpose of the Illuminati. Weishaupt died in 1830, but prior to his death prepared a revised version of the age-old conspiracy, the Illuminati, which under various aliases was to organize, finance, direct, and control all international organizations and groups by working their agents into executive positions at the top. In the United States, we have Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Jack Kennedy, Johnson, Rush, McNamara, Albright, etc. as prime examples. In addition, while Karl Marx was writing the Communist Manifesto under the direction of one group of Illuminists, Professor Carl Ritter of Frankfurt University was writing the antithesis under direction of another group. The idea was that those who direct the overall conspiracy would use the differences in those two so-called ideologies to enable them to divide larger and larger members of the human race into opposing camps, so that they would be armed and then brainwashed into fighting and destroying each other, and particularly to destroy all political and religious institutions. The work Ritter started was continued after his death and succeeded by the German so-called philosopher Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, who founded Nietzscheism. This Nietzscheism was later developed into fascism and then into Nazism, and was used to foment World Wars I and II. In 1834, the Italian revolutionary leader, Giuseppe Mazzini, was selected by the Illuminati to direct their revolutionary program throughout the world. He served in that capacity until he died in 1872. But some years before he died, Mazzini had enticed an American general named Albert Pike into the Illuminati. Pike was fascinated by the idea of a one-world government, and ultimately he became the head of this Luciferian conspiracy. Between 1859 and 1871, he, Pike, worked out a military blueprint for 3 world wars and various revolutions throughout the world, which he considered would forward the conspiracy to its final stage in the 20th century. Again, I remind that these conspirators were never concerned with immediate success. They always operated on a long-range view. Pike did most of his work in his home in Little Rock, Arkansas. But a few years later, when the Illuminati parties of the Grand Orient became suspects and repudiated because of Mazzini's revolutionary activities in Europe, Pike organized what he called the New and Reformed Palladian Right. He set up 3 Supreme Councils, one in Charleston, South Carolina, one in Rome, Italy, and the third in Berlin, Germany. He had Mazzini establish 23 subordinate councils in strategic locations throughout the world. These have been the secret headquarters of the world revolutionary movement ever since. Long before Marconi invented radio, the scientists in the Illuminati had found the means for Pike and the heads of his councils to communicate secretly. It was the discovery of that secret that enabled intelligence officers to understand how apparently unrelated incidents, one such as the assassination of an Austrian prince in Sarajevo, took place simultaneously throughout the world, which developed into a war or a revolution. Pike's plan was as simple as it has proved effective. It called for communism, Nazism, political Zionism, and other international movements organized a view to foment 3 global world wars and at least 2 major revolutions. The First World War was to be fought so as to enable the Illuminati to destroy Tsarism in Russia, as vowed by Rothschild after the Tsar had torpedoed his scheme at the Congress in Vienna, and to transform Russia into a stronghold of atheistic communism. The difference stirred up by agents of the Illuminati between the British and German empires was to be used to foment this war. After the war would be ended, communism was to be built up and used to destroy other governments and weaken religion. World War II, when and if necessary, was to be fomented by using the controversy between fascist and political Zionism. And here let it be noted that Hitler was financed by Krupp, the Warburg, the Rothschild, and other international sanctions.
All local units, possible hacker overriding a drone. Please respond.
Didn't bother to use international sanctions at all.
Received. Responding to the situation now.
Was necessary in order to complete
Drones
worldwide
deployed to
treaties
arrest
of
the
German
suspect.
people and thus bring about the war against them. In short, this Second World War was to be fought to destroy Nazism and to increase the power of political Zionism so that the state of Israel could be established in Palestine. During this World War, international communism was to be built up until it equaled in strength that of United Christendom. When it reached that point, it was to be contained and kept in check until required
Control,
for
we are
final
pursuing the
social
suspect.
cataclysm. As we know now, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin put that exact policy into
Whoa! Oh shit!
Eisenhower.
Ha ha ha! I fell through the bloody building. That's not good.
World War III is to be fomented by using the so-called controversy.
Oh, that's not good, is it? He ended up going through the map.
Now showing up between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Muslim world. That war is to be directed in such a manner that all of Islam and political Zionism
Oh, she's got irons. Alright, she was a nurse.
while at the same time the remaining nations once more divided up.
Right. Your teammate won't be completing their operation so much as they'll be needing one.
Oh, that's shit. I'd like to pay a visit to those responsible. You know, for revenge.
Auto drive now enabled.
By himself foretold all this in a statement he based an agreement on August 15, 1871. Mike stated that after World War II is over, those who will inspire to undisputed world domination will provoke the greatest social cataclysm the world has ever known. Quoting his own
So it is inevitable
I wonder if this is what my
there's going to be a
teachers
World
imagined
War
I'd be
III.
when I grew up.
So this situation with Russia and Ukraine is going to happen. So that you can bring in the World War II.
Auto drive now disabled.
Then everywhere, the people forced to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirit was from that moment on without direction and leadership, and anxious for an ideal that without knowledge where to send its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out into public view. A manifestation which will result from a general reactionary movement, which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. When Mazzini died in 1872, Christ made another Italian revolutionary leader named Acer Nitro.
You'll fit right in. The more people willing to fight the system, the better.
Brilliant. Finally found my people.
Brilliant.
Hi, here.
All those men were financed by British, French,
Right then, what's going on? It's got a gun.
international bankers, all of them dominated by the House of Rothschild. We are supposed to believe that the international bankers of today, like the money changers of Christ's day, are only the tools or agents of the great conspiracy. But actually, they are the masterminds behind all of it. While the general public has been brainwashed by all the mass communications media into believing that communism is a movement of the so-called workers, the actual fact is that both British and American intelligence officers have authentic documents
Auto drive now enabled.
of international liberals operating through their international banking houses, particularly the House of Rothschild, have financed both sides of every war and revolution since 1776. Those who today comprise the conspiracy, CFR in the United States, direct our government, whom they hold in duty through such methods as the Federal Reserve System in America, to fight wars such as Vietnam, created by the United Nations, so as to further fight the Illuminati plan to bring the world to that stage of the conspiracy when atheistic communism and the whole of Christianity can be forced into an all-out.
You really need to listen to this, guys.
As well as on an international scale. The headquarters of the great conspiracy in the late 1700s was in Frankfurt, Germany, where the House of Rothschild had been established by Mayor Amschel, who adopted the Rothschild name and linked together other international financiers who had literally sold their souls to the devil. After the Bavarian government's exposure in 1786, the conspirators moved their headquarters to Switzerland, then to London. Since World War II, after Jacob Schiff, the Rothschild boy in America, died, the headquarters of the American branch has been in the
I don't know how we can get in now, so I tried to get in there once before.
Originally prototypes of Schiff have taken over the manipulation of finances in America for the Illuminati. In the final phases of the conspiracy, the one-world government will consist of the two dictators, head of the United Nations, the CFR, and a few billionaires, economists, and scientists who have proved their devotion to the great conspiracy. All of it are integrated into a vast conglomeration of mongrelized humanity, actually slaves. Now let me show you how our federal government and the American people have been sucked into the one world takeover plot of the Illuminati great conspiracy. And always bear in mind that the United Nations was created to become the housing for that one world so-called liberal conspiracy. The real foundations of the plot for the takeover of the United States were laid during the period of our Civil War. Not that White House and the earlier masterminds had ever overlooked the New World. As I have previously indicated, White House had his agents planted over here as far back as the Revolutionary War. But George Washington was more than an act for them. It was during the Civil War that the conspirators launched.
I keep catching the caps lock button.
We know that you would think
Auto drive now enabled.
we also know that there were Rothschild who tried to sell him into a financial deal with the House of Rothschild. But old age saw through the scheme and bluntly rejected it.
That's why Lincoln got assassinated.
Exactly as the Russian Tsar did when he torpedoed their first League of Nations with the Congress in Vienna.
Auto drive now disabled.
Revealed that the attack in Greece was a mutual official conspiratorial group. Because there were enough of the highly important military involved, the
Auto drive now enabled.
The House of Rothschild to get a flight on our money system, such as they had acquired in Britain and other nations in Europe. I say temporarily because the Rothschilds and the masterminds of the conspiracy never quit. So they had to start from scratch. But they lost no time to get started. Shortly after the
Auto drive now disabled.
called himself Acer Nitro, arrived in New York. Jacob was a young man with a mission for the House of Rothschild. Jacob was the son of a rabbi, born in one of Rothschild's houses in Frankfurt, Germany. I won't go deeply into his background. The important point is that Rothschild recognized in him not only a potential money maker, but more important, he also saw
Hey,
the
go from that.
Machiavellian qualities in Jacob that could, as it did, make him an invaluable functionary in the great one-world conspiracy. After a comparatively brief training period in the Rothschild's London bank, Jacob left for America with instructions to buy into a banking house, which was to be the springboard to acquire control of the money system of the United States. Earlier, I stated that Jacob Schiff came to America with orders by Rothschild. The first and most important one was to get control of the United States money system. Let's trace this step to accomplish that directive. As a first step, we have to
Can you
buy
get it?
into a banking house. But it has to be the kind of a house that we could absolutely control and mold for that primary objective of entrapping our U.S. money system. After carefully scouting around, Jacob bought a partnership in a firm that called itself Kcin Loeb. Like this, Kcin Loeb were immigrants from German Jewish ghettos. They came to the United States in the
Shit.
mid-1840s.
Yeah, oh shit.
Both started their business careers as itinerant fat peddlers. In the early 1850s, they pooled their riches and set up a merchandising store in Lafayette, Indiana, under the firm name of Kcin Loeb,
God's sake.
servicing the covered wagon settlers on their way west. In the years that followed, they set up similar stores in Cincinnati and St. Louis. Then they added pawnbroking to their merchandising pursuit. From that to money lending was a short and quick.
Seriously.
By the time this arrived on the scene, Kcin Loeb was a well-known private banking firm. And this is the firm Jacob bought into. Shortly after he became a partner in Kcin Loeb, Schiff married Loeb's daughter, Teresa. Then
There
he
you go.
bought out
Finally.
Kcin's interest
Oh
and
shit.
moved the firm to New York. And Kcin Loeb became Kcin Loeb and Company, international bankers, with Jacob Schiff, agent of the Rothschilds, ostensibly the sole owner. And throughout his career, this blend of Judas and Machiavelli, the first hierarch of the Illuminati,
It's not letting me in.
posed as a general philanthropist and a man of great holiness. The cover-up policy set forth by the Illuminati. As I have stated, the first great step of the conspiracy was to be the entrapment of our money system. To achieve that objective, it has to get full cooperation of the then big banker elements in America. And that was easier said than done. Even in those years, Wall Street was the heart of the American money market, and J.P. Morgan was its dictator. Next in line were the Drexlers and the Bidders in Philadelphia.
Is that how it's done then?
All the other financiers, big and little, danced to the music of those three houses, but particularly to that of Morgan. All of those three were proud, haughty, arrogant potentates. For the first few
It's not
years,
letting me in.
they viewed the little bewhiskered man from the German ghetto with utter contempt. But Jacob knew how to overcome that. He grew a few Rothschild bones to them. Said bones being distribution in America of desirable European stock and bond issues. Then he discovered he had a still more potent weapon in his hands in the following. It was in the decades following our Civil War that our industries began to burgeon. We had great railroads to build, the oil, mining, steel textile industries were bursting out of their swapping clothes. All that called for vast finance. Much of that financing had to come from abroad. That meant the House of Rothschild. And that was when Kit came into his own. He played a very crafty game. He became the patron saint of John D. Rockefeller, Edward R. Harriman, and Andrew Carnegie. He financed the Standard Oil Company for Rocky, the railroad empire for Hudson, and the steel empire for Carnegie. But instead of hogging all the other industries for King Logan Company, he opened the doors of the House of Rothschild to Morgan, Biddle, and Drexel. In turn, Rothschild arranged the setting up of London, Paris, European, and other branches for those three, but always in partnership with Rothschild subordinates. And Rothschild made it very clear to all those men that Kit was to be the boss in New York. Thus, at the turn of the century, Kit had a tight control of the entire banking fraternity on Wall Street, which by then, with Kit's help, included Lehman Brothers, Goldman Sachs, and other internationalist banks, headed by men chosen by the Rothschilds. In short, that meant control of the nation's money power, and he was then ready for the giant step in practice of our national money system. Now, under our Constitution,
Sync time codes.
all control of our money system is vested solely in our Congress. This next important step was to reduce our Congress and to play that Constitution by surrendering that control to the hierarchy
There is a
of the
hacker
Illuminati
with a spider drone
spirit.
in your area.
In order
Exercise
to
caution.
legalize that surrender, and
Be
thus
advised,
make the
we
people
are on the
powerless
trail.
to resist it would be necessary to have Congress enact special legislation.
Control to units. Suspect is swimming away.
Stooges at both houses of Congress. Stooges powerful enough to railroad Congress into passing such legislation. Equally, or even more important, we would have to plant a stooge at the White House. The president, without integrity and without
No sign of the target.
who
Over.
would sign that legislation into law. To accomplish that, you have to get control of either the Republican or the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party was the more vulnerable.
Negative. Suspect is gone. Issue an APW.
Except for Grover Cleveland, the Democrats have been unable to land one of their men in the White House since before the Civil War. There were two reasons for that. Number one, poverty of the party. Number two, there were considerably more Republican-minded voters than Democrats. The poverty matter was not a great problem, but the voter problem was a different story. As I previously said, Jeff was a smart cookie. Here is the atrocious and murderous method he employed to solve that voter problem. The solution emphasizes how very little the Jewish internationalist bankers care about their own racial brethren, as you shall see. Suddenly, around 1890, there broke out a nationwide series of pogroms in Russia. Many thousands of innocent Jews, men, women, and children were slaughtered by the Cossacks and other faiths. Similar pogroms with similar slaughters of innocent Jews broke out in Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. All those pogroms were fomented by Rothschild agents. As a result, Jewish terrified refugees from all those nations joined into the United States. And that continued throughout the next 2 or 3 decades.
Heading to last known
Because
position.
the program
The suspect was right there a minute
all
ago.
those refugees were aided by self-styled humanitarian committees set up by Schiff, the Rothschilds, and all the
Put a stop
Rothschild
to this.
affiliates. In the main, the refugees streamed into New York, but the Schiff Rothschild Humanitarian Committee found ways to couple many of them to other large cities, such as Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, Detroit, Los Angeles, etc. All of them were quickly transformed to naturalized citizens and educated to register as Democrats. Thus, all of that so-called minority group became solid Democratic voter blocks in their community.
Standard
all
quadrant search.
controlled and maneuvered by
I have
the
this one.
so-called Democrats.
Drone,
Shortly
perform
after
a
the turn
search.
of the century, this vital factor committed to life of our people. That was one of the methods Kip employed to plant men like Nelson Aldrich in our Senate and Woodrow Wilson in the White House. Kip, the Warburg, and the Rothschilds planned and financed the entire Russian Revolution, also the murder of the Tsar and his family, and that Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin took their orders directly from Kip and the other capitalists whom they supposedly are fighting. Now can you see why the vile Earl Warren and his equally vile co-Supreme Court justices issued a decision prohibiting Christian prayers and Christmas carols in our schools? It was done to destroy Christianity. And can you see why Johnson and 56 senators, despite the protest of 90% of the American people, voted for the Consular Treaty, which opened our entire country to Russian spies and saboteurs? All those 56 senators are 20th century Benedict Arnold. It is up to you and you, all of the American people, to force Congress, our elected servants, to haul in those American traitors for impeachment, and that when proven guilty, they all be given the punishment prescribed for traitors who aid and abet our enemies. And that includes the forcing of rigid investigations by Congress of the CFR and all their fronts, such as the ADL, the NAACP, commit. Such investigations will completely unmask all the leaders in Washington and the Illuminati, and all their affiliates and affiliates, as traitors carrying out the Illuminati plot. It will completely unmask the United Nations as the intended crux of the entire plot, and force Congress to take the U.S. out of the UN and hurl the UN out of the U.S. In fact, it will destroy the UN and the entire plot. Before I close,
That's why they're so heavy on it.
stress one vital point, which I urge you to never forget if you wish to save our country for your children and their children. Here is the point. Every unconstitutional and unlawful act committed by Woodrow Wilson, by Franklin Roosevelt, by Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy, and are now being committed by Johnson, is exactly in line with the Illuminati conspirators, centuries-old plot outlined by White House and Albert Pike. Every British decision issued by the traitorous Earl Warren and his equally traitorous Supreme Court justices was directly in line with what the Illuminati's blueprint required. That all the treason committed by our State Department under Rush, and earlier by John Foster Dulles and Marshall, also all the treason committed by Max O'Mara and his predecessors, was directly in line with that same Illuminati blueprint for the takeover of the world. Also the amazing treason by various members of our Congress, especially by the 66 senators who signed for the Consular Treaty, has been committed on orders from the Illuminati. Now I will go back to Jacob Ship's entrapment of our money pit, and the treasonous actions that followed. It will also reveal the ship Rothschild's control of not only Karl Marx, but of Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin, who created the revolution in Russia and set up the Communist Party. It was in 1908 that Schiff decided the time had come for his seizure of our money system. His chief lieutenants in that seizure were Colonel Edward Mandel House, whose entire career was that of chief executive and courier for Schiff, as I shall show.
So that's why they're so keen on not telling anybody.
In the fall of that year, they assembled in secret conclave at the Jekyll Island Transport.
Well, doesn't this look important? Shame if someone were to look it up.
The whole thing will collapse.
Forgive me
The
for
whole
saying, but
UN and everything.
you look like the kind of lunatic who wants to change things.
You're dedsec? That's perfect. Needed someone to help me white out everything I've ever worked for.
Hang on. What?
I was working for this big pharma company. Then I got fired out of the blue. Next thing I know, Albion owns all my research. I know they're running tests in this super top secret military lab. I can't be a part of that. Can you help me destroy my old files? I'll tell you everything I know.
Okay, we'll handle it.
Cool. Cheers. Help me with this and I'll owe you big time.
But they held that railroading in abeyance for 1, 2, 3. They would first have to plant their man and obedience to.
Could you give me a hand here, Baggy?
Well, I've got nothing coming up when I noodle evil lab, but fortunately we've been given the name of a high-level Albion employee who should have that information in their personal files. Here's their info.
So they waited. In 1912, their man, Woodrow Wilson, was elected to the presidency.
And they've got another man now, and all Biden. Useless. Just doing as they're told.
Promptly signed it, and the Federal Reserve Act became law. That famous act of peace was committed in December 23, 1913, 2 days before Christmas, when all the members of Congress, except for several carefully picked representatives and 3 equally carefully picked senators, were away from Washington. How heinously treasonous was that act? I tell you. Our founding fathers knew full well the power of Congress. They knew that whoever had that power held the destiny of our nation in his hands. Therefore, they carefully guarded this power when they set forth in the Constitution that Congress, the elected representatives of the people, alone would have that power. The constitutional language on this point is brief, concise, and specific. Stated in Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 5, defining the duties and powers of Congress. Deploying money
For the hostiles in your area. Over.
We'll engage if necessary.
We have an injured pedestrian. Do something. Over.
Right, close this fucker down.
Wilder was a very rich immigrant who came here on orders from Rothschild for the express purpose of replacing that foul and old Now the vast majority of the American people think that the Federal Reserve System
Control, we have a visual on the suspect.
That is positively false. All of the stock of the Federal Reserve Bank is owned by the member banks, and the heads of the member banks are all members of the hierarchy of the great Illuminati conspiracy known today as the CFR. The details of that act of treason in which many traitors, so-called Americans, participated are far too long for this report. And all those details are available in the book of the Federal Reserve Conspiracy, written by Eustace Smollett. In that book, Mullins tells the entire horrifying story and backs it up with unquestionable documentation.
That's it. I'm calling off the
Aside
pursuit.
from it being a truly fascinating and shocking story of that great betrayal, every American should read it as a matter of vital intelligence.
Right, let's spread out and look.
People will finally come away and smash the entire conspiracy. Now, if you think that those aliens and there by accident of birth American co-conspirators would be content with just the control of our money system, you're in for another very sad shock. The Federal Reserve System gave the conspirators complete control of our money system, but it in no way touched the earnings of the people, because the Constitution positively forbids what is now known as the 20% withholding tax. But the Illuminati blueprint, the one-word slogan, calls for the confiscation of all private property and control of individual earning power. This, Karl Marx's first action in this blueprint, has to be accomplished by a progressive, graduated income tax. As I stated, such a tax would not lawfully be imposed upon the American people. It is simply and expressly forbidden by our Constitution. Thus, only an amendment to the Constitution could give the federal government such confiscatory powers. Well, that too was not an insurmountable problem for our Machiavellian plot. The same elected leaders, both houses of Congress, and the same Mr. Woodrow Wilson, who signed the infamous Federal Reserve Act into law, amended the Constitution to make the federal income tax, known as the 16th Amendment, a law of the land. Both are illegal under our Constitution. In short, the same traitors signed both betrayals, the Federal Reserve Act and the 16th Amendment into law. However, it seems that nobody ever realized that the 16th Amendment was set up to rob, and I do mean rob, the people of their earnings via the income tax provision. The plotters didn't fully use that provision until World War II, when that great humanitarian, Franklin Roosevelt, applied a 20% withholding tax on all small incomes and up to 90% on higher incomes. Oh, of course, he faithfully promised that it would be only for the duration of the war. But what was a promise to such a charlatan, who in 1940, when he was running for his third term, kept proclaiming, I say again and again and again, that I will never send American boys to fight on foreign soil. Remember? He was proclaiming that even as he was already preparing to plunge it into World War II by enticing the Japanese into that sneak attack on Pearl Harbor to furnish it with his excuse. And before I forget, let me remind you that another charlatan named Woodrow Wilson used exactly that same campaign slogan in 1915. His slogan was, re-elect the man who will keep your sons out of the war. Exactly the same formula, exactly the same promises. That 16th Amendment income tax slap was intended to confiscate, rob, the earnings only of the common herd, you and me. It was not intended to touch the huge incomes of the Illuminati gang, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Lamans, and all the other conspirators. So together with that 16th Amendment, they created what they call the tax-free foundation.
Suspect reported in your area, potentially armed and hostile.
All units, we are after the suspect.
And avoid payments of virtually all income taxes. The excuse for it was that the earnings of those tax-free foundations would be devoted to humanitarian philanthropy. So we now have the Federal Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Endowment Fund, the Ford Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, and hundreds of similar tax-free foundations. And what are the hundreds of
the bastards?
They confiscate every year from the earnings of the common herd. You and me, used for it.
Anyone have visual? Anyone?
It still billions to communist people, but bits of hundreds of dead brains, many of which were turned over to Castro, pushed across the plain communist
Returning to HQ.
so that
Search
they
terminated.
can settle shoot down our brains, billions to Red Poland, billions to India, billions to Sopranos, billions to other enemies of the United States. That's what that 350 railroaded 16th Amendment has done to our nation, to the American people, to you and to me, to your children and their children. Our CFR Illuminati-controlled federal government can grant tax-free status to all foundations and pro-red one-word outfits, such as the Fund for the Republic. But if you, or a patriotic pro-organization, is too outspokenly and pro-American, they can terrify and intimidate you by finding a misplaced comma in your income tax report and by threatening you with penalties, fines, and even prison. Future historians will wonder how the American people could have been so naive and stupid as to have permitted such audaciously brazen acts of treason as the Federal Reserve Act and the 15th Amendment. Well, they were not naive and they were not stupid. The answer is they trusted the men they elected to safeguard our country and our people. And they just didn't have even an inkling about either betrayal.
Come here, you flying metal fucker.
had been accomplished. It was the Illuminati-controlled mass communications media that kept and is keeping our people naive and stupid and unaware of the truth being committed. Now the great question is, when will the people wake up and do to our traitors of today what George Washington and our founding fathers would have done to Benedict Arnold? Actually, Benedict Arnold is a petty traitor compared to our present traitors in Washington. Now let's go back to the events that followed the rape of our Constitution by the passage of the Federal Reserve Act of the 16th Amendment. With Wilson completely under their control, the masterminds of the Great Conspiracy put in motion their next and what they hoped would be their final step to achieve their one-world government. The first of those steps was to be World War I. Why war? Simple. The only excuse for a one-world government is that it will supposedly ensure peace. The only thing that can make people cry for peace is war. War brings chaos, destruction, exhaustion, the winner as well as the loser. It brings economic ruin to both. Most important, it destroys the flower and the young manhood of both. To the saddened and heartbroken oldsters, the mothers and fathers, who are left with nothing but memories of their beloved sons, peace becomes worth everything. And that is the emotion upon which the conspirators depend for the success of their satanic plot. Throughout the 19th century, from 1814 to 1940, the world as a whole was a peace. Such wars as the Franco-Prussian, our own civil war, the Russo-Japanese war,
That's going to be hard to explain.
mighty ground local disturbances that did not affect the rest of the world. All the great nations were prosperous. The people staunchly nationalistic and fiercely proud of their sovereignty was utterly unthinkable that the French and the German people would be willing to live under a one-world government, or the Turks and the Russians, or the Chinese and the Japanese. Even more unthinkable that a Kaiser Wilhelm, or a Franz Joseph, or a Tsar Nicholas, or any monarch would willingly and meekly surrender his throne to a one-world government. But bear in mind that the people in all nations are the real power, and only one thing, war, could make the people yearn to one-world government. But it would have to be a tight war, a devastating war. It could not be just a local disturbing war between just two nations. It would have to be a world war. No major nation must be untouched by the horrors and devastation of such a war. The cry for peace must be universal. And truly that was the format set by the Illuminati and Mason Rothschild at the 19th century. They first maneuvered all of Europe into the Napoleonic Wars. Then the Congress in Vienna, which they, and particularly Rothschild, planned to transform into a League of Nations, which was to have been the housing for their one-world
You're
government.
gonna die for messing
The
with us.
country of the present United Nations was set up to be the housing for the forthcoming, God forbid, one-world government. Anyway, that was the format the House of Rothschild and Jacob Schiff decided to employ to achieve their objective in 1914. Of course, they knew that that same format had failed in 1814, but they theorized that was only because the Tsar of Russia had torpedoed that scheme. Well, the present 1914 conspirators will eliminate that 1814 fly in the ointment. They make sure that after the New World War, they were conspiring that he knows our Russia around to throw monkey wrenches into the machinery. I won't go into how they accomplished this first step to launch a world war. History records that World War I was precipitated by a trivial incident, the kind of incident both White House and Albert Pike had incorporated in their blueprint. That incident was the assassination of an Austrian archduke, arranged by the Illuminati mastermind. The war followed. It involves Germany, Austria-Hungary, and their allies, so-called the Axis powers against France, Britain, and Russia, called the Allies. Only the United States was not involved during the first 2 years. By 1917, the conspirators had achieved their primary objective. All of Europe was in a state of destitution. All the peoples were worldly and crying for peace. And the outcome too was all set. It was to come as soon as the United States would be hurled in on the side of the Allies. And that was all set to happen immediately after Wilson's re-election. After that, there would be only one outcome: complete victory for the Allies. To fully confirm my statement that long before 1917, the conspiracy, headed in America by Jacob Schiff, had it all set to hurl the United States into that war, I will cite the proof. When Wilson was campaigning for re-election in 1916, his chief appeal was, re-elect the man who will keep your sons out of the war. But during that same campaign, the Republican Party publicly charged that Wilson had long committed himself to throw us into the war. They charged that if he would be defeated, he would accomplish that act within his few remaining months in office. But if re-elected, he would hold off until after the election. But at that time, the American people looked upon Wilson as a god-man. Well, Wilson was re-elected, and as per the schedule of the conspirators, to hurl us into the war in 1917. He used the sinking of the Lusitania as an excuse, a sinking which also was prearranged. Roosevelt, also a god-man in the eyes of the American people, followed the same technique in 1941, when he used the prearranged Pearl Harbor attack as his excuse for hurling us into World War II. Now, exactly as the conspirators planned, victory for the Allies would eliminate all the monarchs of the defeated nations and leave all their peoples leaderless, confused, bewildered, and perfectly conditioned for the one-world government the great conspiracy intended would follow. But there still would be an obstacle, the same obstacle that had balked the Illuminati and Rothschild at that Congress in Vienna peace gathering after the Napoleonic Wars. Russia would be on the winning side this time, as it was in 1814. Therefore, the Tsar would be securely on his throne. Here it is pertinent to note that Russia, under the Tsarist regime, has been the one country in which the Illuminati has never made a headway, nor have the Rothschilds ever been able to infiltrate their banking secrets. Thus, a winning Tsar would be more difficult than ever to cope with, even if he could be enticed into a so-called League of Nations. A foregone conclusion, but he would never, but never go for a one-world government. So even before the outbreak of World War I, the conspirators had a plan in the making to carry out Nathan Rothschild's vow of 1814 to destroy the Tsar and also murder all possible royal heirs to the throne. And it would have to be done before the close of the war, and the Russian Bolsheviki were to be their instruments in this particular plot. From the turn of the century, the chiefs of the Bolsheviki were Nikolai Lenin, Leon Trotsky, and later Joseph Stalin. Of course, those were not their true family names. Prior to the outbreak of the war, Lenin headquartered in Paris. After the outbreak, Switzerland became his haven. Trotsky's headquarters were on the lower east side of New York, largely the habitat of Russian Jewish refugees. Both Lenin and Trotsky were similarly bewhiskered and unkempt. In those days, that was the badge of Bolshevism. Both lived well, yet neither had a regular occupation. Neither had any visible means of support, yet both always had plenty of money. All those mysteries were solved in 1917. Right from the outset of the war, strange and mysterious goings-on were taking place in New York. Night after night, Trotsky darted furtively in and out of Jacob Schiff's palatial mansion. And in the dead of those same nights, there were gatherings of hoodlums of New York's Lower East Side, all of them Russian refugees, at Trotsky's headquarters, and all were going through some mysterious sort of training process. But it was all shrouded in mystery. Nobody thought, although it did leak out, that Schiff was financing all of Trotsky's activities. Then suddenly Trotsky vanished. So did approximately 300 of his trained hoodlums. Actually, they were on the high seas when a ship, chartered ship, bound for a rendezvous with Lenin and his gang in Switzerland.
Let's fucking do
And
this.
on that ship was $20 million in gold. The $20 million ship provided to finance the Bolsheviki takeover of Russia. In anticipation of Trotsky's arrival, Lenin prepared to throw a party in his Switzerland hideaway. Men of the very highest places in the world were to be guests at that party. Among them were the mysterious Colonel Edward Mansell House, Woodrow Wilson's mentor and Towsley Wowsy, and more important, Swiss special and confidential messengers. Another of the expected guests was Warburg of the Warburg banking plan in Germany, who were financing the Kaiser, and whom the Kaiser had rewarded by making him chief of the secret police of Germany. In addition, there were the Rothschilds of London and Paris, also Litvinov, Kaganovich, Stalin, who was then head of a train and bank-robbing gang of bandits, who was known as the Jesse James of the Ural. And here I must remind that England and France were then long in war with Germany, and that on February 3, 1917, Wilson had broken off all diplomatic relations with Germany. Therefore, Warburg, Colonel House, the Rothschilds, and all those others were enemies. But of course, Switzerland was neutral ground where enemies could meet and be friends, especially if they had some scheme in common. That Lenin party was very nearly wrecked by an unforeseen incident. The discharged ship on its way to Switzerland was intercepted and taken into custody by a British warship. The ship quickly rushed orders to Wilson to order the British to release the ship intact with the Trotsky hoodlums and the gold. Wilson obeyed. He warned the British that if they refused to release the ship, the United States would not enter the war in April as he had faithfully promised a year earlier. The British heeded the warning. Trotsky arrived in Switzerland, and the Lenin party went off as scheduled. But they still faced what ordinarily would have been the insurmountable obstacle of getting the Lenin-Trotsky band of terrorists across the border into Russia. So that's what Brother Warburg, chief of the German secret police, came in. He loaded all those thugs into sealed freight cars and made all the necessary arrangements for the secret entry into Russia. The rest is history. The revolution in Russia took place, and all members of the royal Romanov family were murdered. Now,
Good
my
Lord.
objective is to establish beyond even a remote doubt that communism, so-called, is an integral part of the Illuminati's great conspiracy for the enslavement of the entire world. That communism, so-called, is merely their weapon and bogeyman's word to terrify the peoples of the whole world, and that the conquest of Russia and the creation of communism was in great part organized by Schiff and the other international bankers right in our own city of New York. A fantastic story? Yes. Some might even refuse to believe it. Well, for the benefit of any doubting Thomas, I will prove it by reminding you that just a few years ago, Charlie Knickerbocker, a Hearst newspaper columnist, published an interview with John Schiff, grandson of Jacob, in which young Schiff confirmed the entire story and named the figure old Jacob contributed, $20 million. If anybody still has even a remote doubt that the entire menace of communism was created by the masterminds of the great conspiracy right in our own city of New York, I will cite the following historical facts. All records show that when Lenin and Trotsky engineered the capture of Russia, they operated as heads of the Bolsheviki party. Now, Bolshevism is a purely Russian word. The masterminds realized that Bolshevism could never be sold as an ideology to any but the Russian people. So in April 1918, Jacob Schiff dispatched Colonel House to Moscow with orders to Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin to change the name of their regime to the Communist Party and to adopt the Karl Marx Manifesto as the constitution of the Communist Party. Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin obeyed. And that year of 1918 was where the Communist Party and the menace of communism came into view. All this is confirmed in Webster's collegiate dictionary, disposition. In short, communism was created by the capitalists. Thus, until November 11, 1918,
Always try to attack
the
me, yeah.
entire fiendish plan of the conspirators worked perfectly. All the great nations, including the United States, were war-weary, devastated, mourning their dead. Peace was the great universal desire. Thus, when it was proposed by Wilson to set up a League of Nations to ensure peace, all the great nations, with no Russian czar to stand in their way, jumped on that bandwagon without even stopping to read the fine print in that insurance policy. That is all but one, the United States, the very one that Schiff and his co-conspirators least expected would balk. And that was their one fatal mistake in that early plot. You see, when Schiff planted Woodrow Wilson in the White House, the conspirators assumed that they had the United States in the proverbial bag. Wilson had been perfectly built up as a great humanitarian. He supposedly became established as a godman of the American people. There was every reason for the conspirators to believe that he would easily hornswoggle Congress into buying the League of Nations.
A battleship, it was a battleship, wasn't it?
The Congress of 1945. There was one man in the Senate in 1918 who saw through that scheme, just as the Russian Tsar did in 1840. He was a man of great political stature, almost as great as that of Teddy Roosevelt, and fully as astute. The name of the patriotic American was Henry Cabot Lodge, not the phony of today who called himself Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. until he was exposed. Lodge completely unmasked Wilson and kept the United States out of the League of Nations. Here it becomes of great interest to know the real reason for the Wilson League of Nations plot. He, Schiff, was busy developing and infiltrating the students to serve in all high places in our Washington government and in the job of acquiring control of our money system and the creation of the First Amendment. He also was very busy with organizing the plot for the takeover of Russia. In short, he was kept so busy with all those jobs that he completely overlooked the supreme job of acquiring complete control of our mass communications media. That oversight was a direct cause for Wilson's failure to lure the United States into the League of Nations. Because when Wilson decided to go for the people to overcome the opposition of the large control, despite his established but totally reputation,
City of Westminster.
he found himself by a solidly united people and by a loyal press whose only ideology was Americanism and the American way of life. That was the end of Woodrow Wilson. The conspirators were humanitarians. He quickly abandoned his crusade and returned to Washington, where he shortly died an infidel brought on by syphilis. And that was the end of the
Syphilis, look at that.
corridor to one world government. Of course, that debacle was a terrible disappointment for the masterminds of the Illuminati conspiracy. But they were not discouraged.
So he died of a sexually transmitted disease. Well, syphilis is a sexually transmitted disease, isn't it?
He decided to reorganize it and try from scratch again. By this time, Schiff was very old and slow. He knew it. He knew that the conspiracy needed a new, younger, and more active generalship. So, on his order, Colonel House and Bernard Boone organized and set up what they called the Council on Foreign Relations, the new name under which the Illuminati would continue to function in the United States. The hierarchy, officers and directors of the CFR, is composed principally of descendants of the original Illuminati.
Right, guys, I'll call it a day. It's a long one, this.
And contains the heads of virtually every industrial empire in America, such as Dow, president of the U.S. Steel Corporation.
If anyone's been listening to what I've been listening to on here, it's well worth the listen. His name's
all the international backers
Myron Fagan. He was a specialist spokesman for the Illuminati.
All the men who provide the money and the influence to elect the CFR chosen presidents of the United States, congressmen, senators.
All this was said in 1967. So what we've got now with the vaccines, with the wars, with the Illuminati, it was all planned over 60 years ago.
I will mention the names of a few of the United States presidents who were members of the CFR.
Oh.
Franklin Roosevelt, Herbert Hoover, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Jack Kennedy. Others who were considered for the presidency are Thomas Adlai Stevenson, Nixon, and Vice President of the CFR subsidiary, Barry Goldwater. Among the important cabinet members of the various administrations, we have John Foster Dulles, Alan Dulles, Cordell Hull, John J. McCloy, Morgenthau, Clarence Dillon, Russ, Max Mallon, and just to emphasize the red color of the CFR, we have as members such men as Alger Hiss, Ralph Bunch, Kudwowski, Harry Dexter White, real name White, Owen Lattimore, Philip Jeffries.
Been this pissed in a minute.
Thousands of homosexuals and other blackmailable characters into all the federal agencies from the White House down. Remember Johnson's great friends Jenkins and Bobby Baker? Now, there were many jobs that the new CFR had to accomplish. They required much help. So their first job was to set up various subsidiaries to whom they assigned special objectives. I can't name all.
Why, I man is pissed.
But the following are a few: the Foreign Policy Association, FTA, the World Affairs Council, WAC.
What's going on? How should I say this? I seem to have come across some sort of ancient conflict. The recording you heard came from a strange drone flying around the city. The names of the groups in conflict are obvious enough: Assassins and Templars. But there is no record of either of them online, not even in the furthest fringes of the dark web. So, either these are LARPers with very active imaginations, or we are dealing with two groups that are older and more powerful than we can possibly imagine.
Let's get nosy then.
Good idea. Connie's been helping analyse the data I pulled from the drone. I'm sure she's champing at the bit to tell you more.
Cheers, Bagley.
Cheers, Bagley. He's a bit pissed.
Hello, mate.
Oh, he's not got him control himself.
Let's hear it.
I've been following up on the few clues we got from that recording. Assassins, Templars, this Lucas fella, and the strange drone we got the recording from. Not much to find on the first three, but that drone, it's a doozy.
What do you mean?
It wasn't made by any of the big weapons manufacturers. It's got no serial number, no identifying tags of any kind. I found a proxy to its schematics, and the design is mental. I also found enough GPS to put together a flight path. Whatever's going on here, it's big. You better find that thing.
Agreed.
Agreed. We will find and locate that. Okay, the strange drone. Right, okay. We're calling it a day, guys, so the next mission is to find that drone. We will save and we will go. Take care, guys. I'll see you